As the war in Ukraine rages on, it has become increasingly clear that one aspect of the conflict has been its utility for testing out one's own new weaponry and probing the capabilities of the other side's forces. One area where this has been particularly true has been in the use of electronic warfare and, in particular, the deployment of weapons utilizing artificial intelligence. For more on that, we go to Moscow to speak with military analyst Mark Sleboda. Mark, help us take a look at some of this, would you?
Don, thanks for having me. So anyone paying close attention to the Russian-Ukrainian/NATO conflict right now, heading very close to 2 years at this point and showing no signs of ending anytime soon, is that the use and evolution of weapons and weapon systems on the battlefield. Both sides are using this conflict to experiment, right? Experiment in the most, certainly for Russians, the most heated of circumstances. That they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and because actual Russians are dying, of course, all the NATO weapons being deployed, actual NATO personnel aren't dying. They got the Kiev regime to conscript Ukrainians to do the dying for them.
The proxy corpses, basically.
Yes, but we see, first of all, the range of weapon systems being used on both sides is ever expanding. The Kiev regime, for instance, that makes a very difficult logistical and training problem, because they're using a hodgepodge of weapons from across NATO countries that it turns out are not as compatible as with other NATO countries as
Amazing.
They sometimes were supposed to be. One of the big differences is different. Supposedly a standard 155 millimeter artillery shell, not so standard, it turns out. Tank ammunition and the like. But we also see in evolution of what I would say, future warfare. I think that this war is, shall we say, a hybrid of older, last century techniques, the heaviness on artillery, trench warfare, that might even evoke World War I for the Westerners. Of course, it was a big feature of World War II in Eastern Europe as well. But one foot of this war is solidly in the future, and the ever increasing use of drones and robotic systems on both sides of this combat. And as the Kiev regime is having problems now getting artillery shells, because the West is completely out and their production is only a fraction of what Russia's is, even altogether, they've increasingly turned to these FPV, kind of like first person view, cheap drones, most of them actually sourced from China, in very large numbers. Newsweek has noted that the Kiev regime loses about 10,000 drones a month, right? So they're going through at a huge rate. Now, some of these are a lot used for reconnaissance and artillery spotting and reconnaissance for infantry units, but also FPV drone strikes and then more advanced drone strikes as well. So a huge part. And the Kiev regime, with the shortage of artillery shells, has actually increasingly been switching to, instead of artillery preparation to weaken an enemy before launching an assault, doing the same with FPV drones, because it's what they have and what they can get, and it's cheaper at this moment and more available than artillery shells. So they've trained over 10,000 drone pilots at this point. So it's really significant. And Russia as well. They started perhaps with the drone use, not quite as intense as the Kiev regime in the beginning of the conflict, but now they're overwhelming because they have mass serial production, and they've developed very advanced drone systems that are having a huge effect on the battlefield. And as the growth of drones grows, so does the use of electronic warfare, which is Russia's specialty. They is one of along with air defense, it is what Russia focused on, and the Soviet Union before that for decades to counter NATO air superiority. And The Economist just had an article out this week. Russia is starting to make its superiority in electronic warfare count, and the Kiev regime doesn't have anything but some old Soviet electronic warfare systems and probably a few Western systems they're experimenting with. But all military experts agree that Russia is way ahead of the West in terms of battlefield use of electronic warfare, which is why the Kiev regime is losing 10,000 drones a month because they're captured, brought down, diverted away. But also, just like in the last few weeks, Russia has also been experimenting with the Terminator anti-tank robot. What? The UR-6, Uranus-6 demining robot, which is like practically a small tank of its own. It's a significant system. The Lancet has gone several evolutions. It is used as a loitering munition, but now it's using AI guidance, identification of targets. And they have a cheaper version of the Lancet called the Scalpel, which is just debuting on the battlefield as well, shorter range. The Garan, they're called kamikaze drones or loitering munitions, but they're more like a cheap man's cruise missile, or a cheap cruise missile, shall we say, which is important mass production. Originally based on the Shahed 136 from Iran, it's already gone several evolutions, and the new ones just deployed in the last week, they're black Garans. They're made from special carbon fiber that helps absorb radio signals, radar, and also makes it more difficult to spot at night by local air defense systems and the like. Russia has also debuted the R-37M air-to-air missile, which is now not supposedly being picked up by Ukrainian radar, and also an improved S-400 with a homing missile piloted in by Russia's equivalent of an AWACS. And the combination of the two of those is supposedly responsible for bringing down close to 40 Kiev regime aircraft in the last month. The Kiev regime has also shown some innovations, not as many because they don't have a military-industrial complex, but they're getting a lot of them from NATO. Let's be perfectly honest about maritime drones. They've shown quite interesting use and success of those. They've got their own domestic strike drone called the Baba Yaga, and just last week they showed the new capacity to use it as an carrier, like a drone aircraft carrier for FPV drones, which launch off of its wings, giving the FPV drones an increased range. Also in Avdiivka, Russia had big problems with a machine gun redoubt in south of Avdiivka in Tsarskaya Okhota, and they bombed it with everything, with FABs, guided glide bombs, with the thermobaric Tuls-1A, and it still kept firing. And when they finally took it, it was robotic machine guns. It's not clear yet whether it was autonomous with sensors or remote, but if you've ever seen Aliens, the sentry gun scenes, this is what it is. And it's almost certain that this was the U.S. using them. Israel has used them against the Palestinians as well, but the Palestinians knew where they were on the Iron Wall and hit them with FPV drones from above. Nullifying them. But this is examples of real future warfare happening now. And Putin just last week went to an AI conference in Russia talking about how AI is the future of human civilization and that Russia needs to do everything. A new chapter of human existence, and Russia needs to do everything to encourage companies to use and develop AI in Russia. He also recognizes the dangers of it, but he also knows that everyone is going to be on it, and it is best to be on the train.
Mark, thank you for a peek, out the window into the future, sort of both. And
The future is now. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, thanks a lot. I'll speak with you again next week.
Thanks for having me.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.